Grace's fingers froze on the paper. Her eyes widened as she read the words again, her lips moving silently, praying she'd misunderstood. She hadn't. The contract slipped from her trembling hands and she staggered back, her chest heaving. Across the bedroom, Minho stood perfectly still, watching her with those dark, emotionless eyes that had haunted her dreams for 6 years. No. The word barely escaped her throat. She snatched the paper up again, clutching it so hard it crumpled against her chest. No, you can't. This can't be real. His jaw tightened. That was his only response. Grace's knees buckled and she caught herself against the dresser, staring at her husband. Her husband, like she'd never seen him before. Horror crawled up her spine as the devastating truth of what she'd signed burned into her mind. 3 days ago, Minho Kang, Seoul's most ruthless mafia boss, had asked her to marry him. The man she'd loved in secret while cleaning his mansion, the man she'd prayed for every single night, had finally seen her. Or so she thought. Now, with tears streaming down her face and that cursed contract crushing her ribs, Grace understood the truth. He hadn't married her for love. He'd married her for something he was desperate to have. And the contract she'd signed without reading? Terms involving someone she never expected that made her blood run cold. Terms that would force her to choose between her faith and her freedom. If you're already hooked by Grace's impossible choice, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story is about to take you on an emotional roller coaster you won't forget. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have signed that contract? Now let's dive into how Grace ended up in this nightmare. 6 years earlier, Grace Amati had stepped off the bus in Seoul with $200 in her pocket, a dream of finishing her education and a prayer on her lips. She'd dropped out of university back home when her father got sick, spending every cent she had on his medical bills until there was nothing left, not even him. The maid position at the Kang estate had felt like an answer to prayer. The pay was good, the room was clean, and if she could just save enough for 2 years, maybe 3, she could go back to school and become the teacher she'd always dreamed of being. What she hadn't planned on was Minho. The first time she saw him, he'd walked past her in the hallway like she didn't exist. Tall, sharp-featured, with eyes that could freeze fire. He wore expensive suits and carried himself like a man who'd never heard the word no. The other staff whispered about him, about his business dealings that happened in the shadows, about the men who came to the house at midnight, about the way his first wife had left him after only 8 months of marriage. Grace kept her head down and did her job. She scrubbed floors, dusted shelves, and pretended not to notice. The beautiful, broken man who lived like a ghost in his own home. But over the months, she began to see things others didn't. She noticed how he stood at his office window at 3 in the morning, staring out at nothing. She saw the way he touched the doorframe of the nursery that had never been used, his fingers lingering like he was mourning something that never existed. She heard him on the phone with his mother, his voice tight with shame when she asked about grandchildren. And somewhere between year 2 and year 3, Grace's prayers changed. She stopped praying just for tuition money. She started praying for him, for the sadness in his eyes, for whatever ghosts kept him awake at night. She told herself it was Christian compassion. It wasn't. She was falling in love with a man who would never love her back. By year 5, Grace had perfected the art of invisible devotion. She learned how he took his coffee, black, no sugar, in the blue mug his grandmother had given him, and made sure fresh flowers were always in his office because she'd once seen him pause to smell them. She played gospel music softly while she cleaned because one morning he'd stopped in the hallway and asked her what song that was, and for 5 whole seconds he'd actually looked at her. "Amazing, Grace," she'd told him, her heart hammering. "Fitting," he'd said, and walked away. It was the longest conversation they'd ever had. Grace knew she was being foolish. She was the help. He was Seoul's most powerful crime boss. There were 1,000 reasons why her feelings were impossible, but she couldn't help believing that God had put her in this house for a reason. Maybe not for romance. She wasn't that naive, but for something. Some purpose she couldn't yet see. She just had to have faith. Then came the night everything changed. It was late, well past midnight, and Grace had stayed late to finish the laundry. She was folding towels in the utility room when she heard raised voices. Coming from Minho's office. She shouldn't have listened. She knew better, but something in his tone made her freeze. "I don't care what Mother wants." Minho's voice was cold, controlled. "There won't be an heir. There can't be. We've been over this." then what happens to everything you've built? That was Minjai, his younger brother. Grace had seen him around the estate, charming, smooth-talking, always with a smirk that made her skin crawl. When you're gone, it all goes to me anyway, unless you plan on living forever. I'm working on options. Options? Minjai laughed, bitter and sharp. What options? You're broken, Hyung. Admit it. Your ex-wife already did. The sound of glass shattering made Grace jump. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart racing. Get out. Minho's voice was deadly quiet. I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You're not a complete man. You can't give the family what it needs. So stop pretending. I said get out. Footsteps. A doctor slamming. Then silence. Grace stood in that utility room for a full 5 minutes before her hands stopped shaking. She'd heard rumors, of course, whispers among the staff about why Minho's marriage had failed, about medical appointments, about shame. But hearing it confirmed like that, hearing the pain underneath his anger, it broke something in her chest. That night, she prayed harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. Not for herself, for him, for healing, for hope, for a miracle. She had no idea God was about to answer that prayer in the most devastating way possible. 3 weeks later, Minho called her into his office. Grace's hands were still damp from washing dishes when she knocked on the heavy oak door. She'd been summoned to this office exactly twice in 6 years. Once when she was hired, once when she'd accidentally broken an expensive vase. Her stomach churned as she pushed the door open. Minho sat behind his desk, his face unreadable. Close the door. Sit. Down. She obeyed, perching on the edge of the leather chair across from him. This was it. She was getting fired. Maybe he'd found out she'd overheard that conversation with his brother. Maybe, I have a proposition for you. His eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time in 6 years, he was really looking at her, seeing her. It will sound insane, but I need you to hear me out. Grace's mouth went dry. She nodded. You've been saving money for school. It wasn't a question. He knew. Of course he knew. How much do you have? About $15,000, she whispered. Not nearly enough for a degree. He leaned back in his chair. What if I told you I could give you a full scholarship to any university you want? A house, a car, anything you need to build the life you've dreamed of. Grace's heart stopped. I don't understand. In exchange, Minho continued, his voice carefully neutral. I need something from you, something no one else can give me. Room felt like it was tilting. Grace gripped the armrests of her chair. I need you to marry me. He said it like he was discussing a business merger. And I need you to give me an heir. The world went silent. Grace stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What? I'm offering you marriage, a contract marriage. You'll have everything you've ever wanted. All I ask is that you give me a child to carry on my name. Grace's mind was spinning. This couldn't be real. Men like Minho didn't propose to their maids. They didn't offer impossible dreams wrapped up in... Wait. Why me? The question came out strangled. For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Something raw, something almost human breaking through the cold exterior. Because I've watched you for 5 years, he said, his voice dropping lower, more intense. Every single day, you're good. Virtuous in a world where no one is anymore. You pray like you actually believe someone's listening. You believe in things, in hope, in purpose, in something bigger. He paused, his eyes boring into hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. You're exactly the kind of woman who would make a good mother. The kind who wouldn't abandon a child just because of how it came to be. The kind who would raise them right, give them what they need. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, vulnerability flashed across his face. The kind of mother who could give my heir a real chance at being better than me. Tears burned in Grace's eyes, but she didn't know if they were from joy or confusion or the sheer insanity of this moment. There's a contract, he continued, sliding a thick folder across the desk. It outlines everything. Read it carefully. Take your time. If you agree, we'll proceed. Grace's hands shook as she reached for the folder. Her entire body felt like it was vibrating. The man she'd loved for years was asking her to marry him. It didn't matter that it was a business arrangement. It didn't matter that he didn't love her back. God was giving her a chance, a miracle. I don't need time, she heard herself say. Yes, I'll do it. Minho's eyebrows rose slightly. You haven't read the contract. I don't need to. Grace met his eyes, her faith burning bright through her fear. I trust you. Something dark passed over his face, there and gone so quickly she almost missed it. Then sign here. He pushed a pen toward her. Grace signed her name on the dotted line, her hand steady despite the tears now streaming down her face. She was going to marry Min-ho Kang. She was going to be his wife. Maybe, just maybe, he would learn to love her. Maybe this was God's plan all along. The wedding happened 3 days later. No guests, no celebration. Just a quiet civil ceremony with 2 witnesses Min-ho had hired. Grace wore a simple white dress she'd bought from a department store. Min-ho wore one of his usual black suits. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Min-ho didn't kiss her. He simply nodded, signed the papers, and told her to move her things into the East Wing bedroom. Not his bedroom, a separate one. Grace told herself it was fine. They barely knew each other as anything other than employer and employee. These things took time. She'd be patient. She'd pray. She'd trust God's timing. For 3 days, she floated through the mansion in a daze. She was Mrs. Kang now. The title felt surreal every time one of the staff used it. She waited for Min-ho to call for her, to talk to her, to acknowledge that their relationship had changed. He didn't. On the 3rd night, alone in her beautiful new bedroom that felt more like a prison than a gift, Grace finally opened the contract folder she'd been too emotional to read before signing. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Legal jargon, financial terms, property rights. Everything seemed standard until she reached page 17, clause 17, provision for heir. Grace's breath caught as she read the words once, twice, 3 times, praying she was misunderstanding. She wasn't. The paper slipped from her trembling hands and she staggered back, her chest heaving. Across the bedroom, Min-ho stood perfectly still. When had he come in, watching her with those dark, emotionless eyes that had haunted her dreams for 6 years? No. The word barely escaped her throat. She snatched the paper up again, clutching it so hard it crumpled against her chest. No, you can't. This can't be real. His jaw tightened. That was his only response. Grace's knees buckled and she caught herself against the dresser, staring at her husband. Her husband, like she'd never seen him before. Horror crawled up her spine as the devastating truth of what she'd signed burned into her mind. The contract stated it clearly, in cold legal language that made her stomach turn. Min-ho was medically unable to father children. Therefore, to fulfill the terms of their agreement and produce an heir to the Kang name, Grace would be required to conceive a child with Min-ho's brother, Min-jae, who shared his bloodline. The child would be raised as Min-ho's legitimate heir. Min-jae would have no parental rights, and Grace would have no choice. It was all there, legally binding, already signed. You lied to me. Grace's voice cracked. You said you needed me to give you an heir. You never said... She couldn't even finish the sentence. I didn't lie. Min-ho's voice was flat. I do need you to give me an heir. The method was outlined in the contract. The contract you knew I wouldn't read. She hurled the papers at him. They scattered across the floor between them. You tricked me. I gave you an opportunity. You chose not to take your time reviewing it. His face remained impassive, but his hands had curled into fists at his sides. The agreement is legally binding. Grace pressed her hand to her mouth, bile rising in her throat. I won't do it. I can't. I'm a Christian. I'm a virgin. I can't just... The words dissolved into sobs. The contract allows for no dissolution of marriage, Min-ho said quietly. Divorce is not an option. Then I'll run. Grace backed toward the door. I'll leave. You can't force me to... Where will you go? He didn't move, but his voice stopped her cold. Back home with nothing? You signed a contract, Grace? If you break it, you'll owe me significant financial penalties. You don't have that kind of money. She was trapped, legally, financially, completely trapped. Grace sank to the floor, her whole body shaking with sobs. This was supposed to be an answer to prayer. This was supposed to be her miracle. Instead, she'd walked straight into a nightmare. Why? She choked out. Why would you do this to me? For a long moment, Min-ho didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Because I'm desperate. Because my family's legacy dies with me if I don't produce an heir. Because I thought... He stopped. I thought you'd understand, that your faith would make you willing to do what needed to be done. My faith? Grace's laugh was bitter and broken. My faith tells me this is wrong, that what you're asking me to do is a sin, that I'd rather die than you won't die. Minho turned away, his shoulders rigid. You'll adjust. Minjae will come tomorrow to discuss the logistics. No. Grace scrambled to her feet, desperation making her bold. Please, please, there has to be another way. We could adopt, we could… The heir must be blood. His voice was final. That's non-negotiable. Then let me go. Tears streamed down her face. Please, I'll sign anything, I'll give back everything, just let me go. Minho's hand rested on the doorknob, his back still to her. For a moment, she thought she saw his shoulders sag, saw some crack in his armor. But when he spoke, his voice was ice. No, you signed a contract, you'll fulfill it. He left, closing the door behind him with a soft click that sounded like a prison lock. Grace collapsed onto the bed and cried until she had nothing left. Are you feeling Grace's pain right now? Because this story gets even more intense. If you're invested in seeing how she fights her way out of this nightmare, smash that like button and drop a comment telling me what you'd do in her position. Would you fight back or give up? Let me know below. The next morning, Grace woke up with swollen eyes and a hollow ache in her chest. She'd prayed through the night, begging God for a way out, for wisdom, for anything. But the morning light brought no answers, only dread. Her wedding dress still hung in the closet where she'd carefully placed it 3 days ago, treating it like a precious memory. Now she yanked it down and threw it in the trash. That dream was dead. A knock at her door made her freeze. Grace? It wasn't Minho's voice. It was smoother, cockier. I know. You're in there. We need to talk. Minjae. Grace's stomach turned. She wrapped herself in a robe and cracked the door open just enough to see his face. He was leaning against the doorframe, that same smirk she'd always hated playing on his lips. So you've read the contract by now, I assume? His eyes dragged over her in a way that made her skin crawl. About time we discussed the details. Get away from me. Grace tried to close the door, but he caught it with his foot. Hey, hey, hey. He held up his hands in mock surrender. I'm not the bad guy here. I'm just doing what my brother asked. You should be thanking me, really. Not every woman gets the chance to… Don't. Grace's voice shook with rage. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Minjae's smirk widened. Oh, come on. You married into this family for money and status. Don't act so high and mighty now that it's time to earn it. I married your brother because I… She stopped herself, but not before Minjae's eyes lit up with understanding. Oh, this is rich. He laughed, cruel and delighted. You actually love him, don't you? Poor little maid fell for the broken king. He leaned closer. Newsflash, sweetheart. My brother doesn't love anyone. He's using you, and when I give you that baby, everything he's built, it'll eventually come to me anyway. Grace slammed the door in his face and locked it, her whole body trembling. From the other side, she heard his voice, dripping with malice. You can't hide forever, Grace. The contract says you have 30 days to start trying. Tick-tock. His footsteps faded down the hallway, and Grace slid down the door until she was sitting on the floor, her head in her hands. She couldn't do this. She wouldn't. But what choice did she have? For 3 days, Grace locked herself in her room. She refused meals, refused visitors. She spent every moment on her knees, praying, begging, pleading with God for a way out of this impossible situation. On the 4th day, Minho came to her door. Open it, Grace. His voice was quiet but firm. We need to talk. She didn't move. I know you're in there. I know you haven't eaten. This isn't sustainable. Neither is what you're asking me to do. She shot back through the door. Silence. Then, I'm coming in. A key turned in the lock. Of course he had a key. This was his house. She was just his prisoner. Minho stepped inside and closed the door behind him. He looked tired, she noticed, like he hadn't slept either. You can't starve yourself, he said. Watch me. Grace, don't. She stood up, facing him with all the fury she'd been nursing for days. Don't you dare act like you care. You bought me like cattle. You trapped me in a contract designed to humiliate me. And now you want me to quietly submit to being passed to your brother, like I'm some kind of… Her voice broke. I thought you were better than this. Something flickered in Minho's eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. I never claimed to be good. No, but I believed you were. Grace's tears returned, hot and angry. I prayed for you. For years, I prayed that God would heal whatever was broken in you. I thought maybe that's why I was here. Maybe God put me in your path for a reason. She laughed bitterly. Turns out the reason was just to be used. Minho's jaw tightened. He looked away. If there was another way, there is. Grace stepped toward him, desperate. We don't have to do this. We could annul the marriage. We could— No. His voice was steel. The family needs an heir. That's not negotiable. Then hear me out. Grace took a shaky breath, an idea forming even as she spoke. You want me to do this? Fine, but I have conditions. Minho's eyes snapped back to hers, surprised. I need 6 months, she said. 6 months where we try. Together, first. His face went carefully blank. That's not possible. I don't care what the doctor said. Grace's voice strengthened. I believe in miracles. I believe God can do the impossible. And if you want me to go through with this nightmare contract, you're going to give me 6 months to believe it. Grace. 6 months, she repeated firmly. You be with me as my husband should be. We try, we pray, and if after 6 months nothing happens, then— She swallowed hard. Then I'll consider the alternative. Minho stared at her like she'd lost her mind. You're asking me to fail in front of you, to prove my inadequacy. No. Grace shook her head. I'm asking you to have faith, to try, to actually be my husband instead of my jailer. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Minho's hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, his face a storm of emotions he was clearly fighting to contain. And if I refuse? He finally asked. Grace lifted her chin. Then I'll fight this contract in court. I'll make it public. I'll tell everyone what you tried to make me do. It'll destroy your reputation. It'll destroy you too. I don't care anymore. And she meant it. I'd rather be destroyed fighting than destroyed submitting. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Then, impossibly, Minho nodded. 6 months, but when nothing happens? If nothing happens, Grace corrected, we trust God, not our own understanding. Minho's expression was unreadable as he turned to leave, but at the door he paused. You really believe that, don't you? That your God can fix what science says is broken? I believe my God specializes in impossible things, Grace said quietly. The question is, do you? He left without answering, but that night, for the first time since their wedding, Minho knocked on Grace's door and asked if he could come in, not as her captor, not as her employer, but as her husband. It was a small step, but it was a beginning. The first month was awkward and painful in ways Grace hadn't anticipated. Minho approached their arrangement like a business transaction, clinical and detached. He came to her room 3 times a week, stayed exactly long enough to fulfill what he saw as his obligation, and left without a word. It broke Grace's heart every single time, but she refused to give up. After each encounter, she would lie in bed and pray, her hands on her stomach, believing for the miracle she couldn't see. She started leaving her Bible open on the nightstand to passages about barren women who bore children. Hannah, Sarah, Elizabeth, women who'd waited and believed and received the impossible. Minho never commented on it, but she noticed his eyes lingering on those passages sometimes. But one night, everything changed in a way Grace hadn't anticipated. It was after their first time together, and Minho had stayed a few minutes longer than usual. Grace lay in the darkness, trying to steady her breathing when she heard his voice, rough and shaken. You were telling the truth. Grace turned her head toward him. About what? You were innocent. It wasn't a question. It was a realization, and his voice carried something between awe and devastation. You actually were. Grace felt her cheeks heat even in the darkness. I told you I was. I know, Minho sat up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. In the dim light from the window, Grace could see his shoulders were tense. I didn't believe you. When you found out about the contract and told me you were a virgin, that you couldn't do what I was asking, I thought you were just, I don't know, playing a role, saying what you thought I wanted to hear so I'd protect you from the contract. Why would I lie about that? Because everyone lies, Minho said flatly. In my world, everyone has an angle. Everyone wants something. He turned to look at her, and even in the shadows, she could see the conflict in his eyes. But you weren't lying. You gave me something precious, something you'd saved, and I treated it like a transaction. Grace sat up slowly, pulling the sheet around herself. Minho, I'm a terrible person, he continued, his voice raw. You were pure, innocent, and I trapped you in a contract designed to destroy that innocence. What kind of man does that? A desperate one, Grace said softly. A hurting one. That's not an excuse. No, Grace agreed, but it's a reason. She reached out hesitantly and touched his shoulder. He flinched but didn't pull away. I chose to sign that contract. Yes, I didn't read it all, but I chose to say yes when you asked me to marry you. I chose to believe God brought me here for a purpose. Your God wouldn't want this for you? Minho said bitterly, being trapped with someone like me. My God, Grace said firmly, specializes in redeeming impossible situations, and maybe this is exactly where he wants me. Maybe you're exactly who he wants me to pray for. Minho looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. How can you still have faith after what I've done to you? Because faith isn't about my circumstances, Grace said. It's about who God is, and I believe he's bigger than any contract, bigger than any scheme, big enough to turn this nightmare into something beautiful. Minho stared at her for a long moment, and Grace saw something shift in his expression. The walls weren't gone, not yet, but there was a crack, a small opening where light could get in. I don't deserve your forgiveness, he said quietly. Probably not, Grace admitted, but I'm giving it anyway. That's what grace means. Minho's laugh was hollow and broken. Grace, your name is Grace, and you're showing me something I don't know how to receive. Then learn, Grace said simply. We have 6 months. Learn how to receive grace. Learn how to believe in something bigger than yourself. Learn how to hope. He didn't respond, but he also didn't leave. Instead, he lay back down beside her, careful not to touch her, and stared at the ceiling. I thought I knew what I was doing, he said after a long silence. I thought I had it all figured out, but you've turned everything upside down. Good, Grace whispered. Maybe it needed to be turned upside down. That night, Minho didn't leave until she fell asleep, and when Grace woke the next morning, there was a fresh bouquet of flowers on her nightstand and a note in Minho's precise handwriting. Thank you for the gift you gave me. I didn't deserve it. I'll spend the rest of these 6 months trying to become someone who does. M. Grace clutched the note to her chest and cried, not from sadness this time, but from hope, because she could see it now, the man Minho could become. The man God was already shaping him into. The transformation had begun. In the second month, something began to shift. Minho started staying a few minutes longer after. Not talking, just staying. Grace would pretend to be asleep, but she'd feel him watching her in the darkness, and she wondered what he was thinking. One night, she broke the silence. Tell me about your ex-wife, she said softly. Minho stiffened beside her. Why? Because I want to understand. What happened? For a long time, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice so low she almost missed it, he said, I told her the truth about my condition. She said she understood, that it didn't matter. His laugh was hollow. It mattered. 6 months into the marriage, I found her in bed with someone else. She said if I couldn't give her children, she'd find someone who could. Grace's heart clenched. I'm sorry. Don't be. She was honest at least, more honest than I was with you. Grace rolled over to face him in the darkness. You could have told me the truth from the beginning. Would you have agreed? If I'd laid it all out, my condition, the plan with my brother, would you have signed? No, Grace admitted, but I might have found another solution, together. Don't know how to do things together. Minho said quietly. I only know how to control, how to plan, how to make people do what I need them to do. That's not love, Grace whispered. That's fear. He didn't respond, but she felt him tense beside her. What are you afraid of? She pressed gently. That I'm exactly what everyone says I am. Broken, incomplete, not a real man. Grace reached out in the darkness and found his hand. He flinched but didn't pull away. You're not broken. You're human. There's a difference. Your faith makes you naive. Maybe. Grace squeezed his hand. Or maybe it makes me brave enough to believe when everyone else has given up. Minho said nothing, but his fingers tightened around hers. He'd been staying longer each night, but this was different. This time, he pulled her closer, holding her like she was something precious he'd almost lost. Two broken people, beginning to believe in something neither of them could fully see yet. By month 3, everything had changed. Minho started coming to dinner, actually sitting across from Grace and having conversations about her day, her dreams, her faith. He asked questions about the God she prayed to, about how she could believe in something so intangible. "I believe because I've seen him move," Grace explained one evening over pasta she'd made herself. "When my father was sick, we had no money for treatment. I prayed, and the next day, an anonymous donor paid his entire hospital bill. When I needed a job to survive in Seoul, I found your ad the same day I arrived. God has always made a way." "Or coincidence," Minho countered, but his tone wasn't mocking, just curious. "Coincidence is just God's way of staying anonymous," Grace smiled. Something softened in Minho's face. "You really believe he'll make a way for us too?" "I have to," Grace said simply, "because if I don't believe in miracles, what's the point of any of this?" That night when Minho came to her room, he kissed her forehead before he left. It was gentle, almost reverent, like she was precious. Grace cried after he left, but this time they were tears of hope. The 4th month brought a crisis Grace hadn't anticipated. Min-jae cornered her in the hallway one afternoon, his patience clearly worn thin. "4 months, he hissed, backing her against the wall. 4 months of my brother playing house with you, and nothing to show for it. This is ridiculous." "The agreement was 6 months, Grace said, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The agreement was that you'd give this family an heir." Min-jae's hand slammed against the wall beside her head. "And we both know my useless brother can't deliver, so stop wasting everyone's time and let's get this done." "Get away from her." Minho's voice cut through the hallway like a blade. Grace had never seen him look so dangerous. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and physically pulled Min-jae away. From her. "Don't you ever touch my wife again," Minho said, his voice deadly quiet. Min-jae laughed, but there was nervousness in it now. "Your wife? Since when do you care about her as anything other than an incubator?" Minho's fist connected with Min-jae's jaw so fast, Grace barely saw it coming. Min-jae stumbled back, blood trickling from his lip. "I said don't touch her." Minho stepped between Grace and his brother, his body a wall of protection. "And don't speak to her, don't look at her, don't even think about her, she's mine." The possessiveness in his voice sent shivers down Grace's spine. Min-jae wiped the blood from his mouth, his eyes narrow with rage. "You're going to regret this, Young. When you fail, and you will fail, that contract is still binding, and I'll be waiting." He stalked off, leaving Grace trembling against the wall. Minho turned to her immediately, his hands gentle as they cupped her face. "Did he hurt you?" Grace shook her head, too, overwhelmed to speak. "I won't let him touch you," Minho said fiercely. "Contract or no contract, I won't." "But the agreement, I don't care about the agreement anymore." Minho's eyes were blazing with something Grace had never seen before, something that looked almost like love. "I care about you. You've become more to me than any heir ever could." Grace's breath caught. "Minho, I know I don't deserve you," he continued, his voice raw. "I know I've treated you terribly, but these past months, watching you believe in me, pray for me, refuse to give up on me." He stopped, struggling with words. "You've made me want to be the man you see when you look at me, not the broken one, the real one." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "You are real. You always were. You just needed to believe it." Minho pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious he'd almost lost. And for the first time since their wedding night, Grace felt like maybe, just maybe, her prayers were being answered. Just not in the way she'd expected. Month 5 brought a different kind of miracle. Grace woke up one morning feeling strange, nauseous, dizzy. She'd been so focused on praying for conception that she almost didn't recognize the symptoms when they came. She didn't say anything, not yet. It was probably nothing. Stress, hope making her imagine things. But when it happened again the next day and the day after that, Grace bought a pregnancy test from a pharmacy 3 districts away, too afraid to hope but too desperate not to check. She took the test alone in her bathroom, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. 3 minutes. The box said to wait 3 minutes. They were the longest 3 minutes of her life. When the second line appeared, faint but unmistakable, Grace's knees gave out. She sank to the bathroom floor, the test clutched in her trembling hands, and sobbed. Pregnant. She was pregnant. The impossible had happened. God had done what science said couldn't be done. Grace wanted to run straight to Minho, to show him, to celebrate this miracle together. But something held her back. Fear, maybe. Or the memory of how fragile he'd been, how much this meant to him. She needed to be sure, absolutely sure. So she made a doctor's appointment for the following week at a clinic far from the Kang family's usual medical providers. She went alone, wearing sunglasses and a hat, feeling like a spy in her own life. The doctor confirmed it. 6 weeks pregnant. Congratulations, the doctor said warmly. Do you have any questions? Grace had 1,000 questions, but only one that mattered. Is it viable, healthy? Everything looks perfect, the doctor assured her. You're young, healthy, no reason to expect complications. Grace walked out of that clinic feeling like she was floating. She stopped at a church on the way home and sat in the back pew for an hour, just crying and thanking God for this impossible gift. But as the initial joy faded, reality crept in. She had to tell Minho. But how? After everything he'd been through, all the shame and pain and medical confirmations that he couldn't father children, how was she supposed to tell him that somehow, impossibly, he had? Would he even believe her? Or would he assume the worst, that she'd been unfaithful, that the child was someone else's? Grace prayed for wisdom all the way home. That evening, she asked Minho to meet her in the garden. It was where she felt closest to God, surrounded by the flowers and trees that testified to the Creator's power to bring life from nothing. Minho found her sitting on the stone bench by the fountain, her hands folded in her lap, her heart hammering in her chest. You wanted to talk? He sat beside her, concern creasing his brow. Are you okay? You've seemed distant lately. Grace took a deep breath. This was it. I have something to tell you, and I need you to listen, with an open mind and an open heart. His expression grew wary. Okay. 5 months ago, I made you a promise, Grace began. I said I believed God could do the impossible, that I wanted 6 months to trust him for a miracle. She turned to face him fully. Minho, I'm pregnant. The color drained from his face. For a long moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. That's not possible, he finally said, his voice hollow. I have the test results. Grace pulled the folded papers from her pocket. From a doctor, it's confirmed, I'm 6 weeks along. Minho took the papers with shaking hands. He read them once, twice, 3 times. His breathing was getting faster, more ragged. This can't be mine, he said, and the words landed like a knife in Grace's chest. It is yours, she said firmly. I haven't been with anyone else. I couldn't. But the doctor said, the doctors were wrong. Grace reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Minho, look at me. This is our miracle. This is what I've been praying for, what we've been hoping for. Or you've been lying to me this whole time? Minho stood abruptly, his face a mask of pain and suspicion, his voice rising with each word. Maybe you and Minjai finally, maybe he wore you down with his constant harassment. Maybe you gave in just to make it stop, to end the pressure, and now you're trying to pass his child off as mine. He paced away from her, his hands shaking. Maybe this whole miracle story is just a convenient cover for what really happened. Maybe you've been playing me this entire time. Don't. Grace shot to her feet, fury blazing through her hurt. Don't you dare accuse me of that. I have never, not once, been with your brother. I told you I'm a virgin. I was a virgin until you, only you. Then how do you explain this? He shook the papers at her. How do you explain a pregnancy that medically shouldn't exist? I explain it with faith. Grace's voice rose. I explain it with prayer. I explain it with the God you've spent 5 months watching me believe in. Tears streamed down her face. You said I made you want to believe. You said I made you want to be better. Was that all a lie? Because the second God answers my prayers, you assume I'm the liar? Minho's face crumpled. He sank back onto the bench, his head in his hands. I don't know what to believe anymore. Grace sat beside him, her anger melting into compassion. She understood. This was bigger than facts or faith. This was about a man who'd been told his entire adult life that he was broken, being confronted with evidence that maybe he wasn't. "I know this is scary," she said softly. "I know it doesn't make sense. But Minho, when has God ever made sense? When has faith ever been about what we can see or prove?" She took his hand, and this time he didn't pull away. "I'm asking you to take a leap, to believe that maybe, just maybe, the impossible happened. That your brokenness wasn't the end of your story." Minho looked at her, his eyes red and haunted. "What if you're wrong? What if the child isn't mine and I let myself hope?" "Then we'll deal with it together," Grace said. "But Minho, deep in your heart, do you really think I would betray you like this? After everything?" He stared at her for a long moment. Then slowly, he shook his head. No, I don't." "Then trust me," Grace whispered. "Trust God. Trust that this is real." Minho pulled her into his arms and held on like she was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly stopped making sense. Grace felt his shoulders shake and realized he was crying. Actually crying. "I want to believe," he choked out. "I want this to be real so badly." "It is real," Grace promised, holding him just as tightly. "We're going to have a baby, our baby." And there in that garden, surrounded by the evidence of God's creative power, Minho finally let himself hope. If you're crying, right now, you're not alone. This story is hitting different, isn't it? Before we continue to the beautiful conclusion, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already, and drop a comment telling me what you think happens next. Does Minjae accept defeat? Does the pregnancy go smoothly? Let me know your predictions. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of doctor's appointments, prenatal vitamins, and Minho's almost comical overprotectiveness. He insisted Grace stop working entirely. He hired a nutritionist. He read pregnancy books late into the night. And he smiled, actually smiled. Grace hadn't even known he was capable of such genuine joy, but their happiness didn't go unnoticed. Minjae watched from the shadows, his rage growing with each passing day. The maid had actually gotten pregnant. His supposedly sterile brother had somehow produced an heir, which meant Minjae's claim to the inheritance was slipping away. He couldn't let that happen. One afternoon, while Minho was away on business, Minjae cornered Grace in the library. "Congratulations," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "I heard the good news." Grace's hand instinctively went to her stomach, protective. "Stay away from me, Minjae." "Oh, I'm not here to hurt you." He circled her slowly like a predator. "I'm just here to ask a question. Are you sure that baby is Minho's?" "Get out. Because if there's even a chance it's not..." Minjae's smile was vicious. "Well, that changes everything, doesn't it? The contract is still binding, and if my brother can't actually produce an heir after all..." "The baby is his," Grace said firmly. "We had genetic testing done. Paternity is confirmed." The lie came out smooth as silk. They hadn't done testing yet, it was too early, but Grace needed him to believe it, needed him to back off. Minjae's smile faltered. "You're lying. I have the results. Ask Minho if you don't believe me." Grace lifted her chin. "Your brother is the father, which means you have no claim, not to the baby, not to the inheritance, not to anything." For a moment, Minjae's mask slipped, and Grace saw the raw hatred underneath. Then he smiled again, colder than before. "We'll see," he said softly. "Pregnancies are delicate things. Lots can go wrong in 9 months." The threat hung in the air like poison. "If anything happens to me or this baby," Grace said, her voice steady despite her fear, "Minho will know exactly who's responsible, and you know what he's capable of when someone threatens what's his." Minjae's jaw tightened. Without another word, he turned and left. Grace waited until his footsteps faded before her knees gave out. She sank into a chair, her whole body shaking. When Minho came home that evening, she told him everything. His reaction was immediate and terrifying. Grace had seen him angry before, but this was something else entirely. This was the Mafia boss everyone feared, the man who'd built an empire on ruthlessness and control. "I'll kill him," Minho said flatly. "I'll actually kill him." "No." Grace grabbed his arm. "That's exactly what he wants. To provoke you. To make you do something that destroys you. He threatened you. He threatened our child. And we're going to protect them by being smarter than him. Grace said firmly, not by giving him ammunition. Minho's hands clenched into fists, but he nodded. Fine, but he's out. Out of the company, out of the family, out of my life. And the contract? I'm having my lawyers tear it apart, find loopholes, whatever it takes. You're not bound to that nightmare anymore. Minho cupped her face gently. I should never have done that to you. I should never have put you in that position. You were desperate, Grace said softly. You didn't know there was another way. You showed me another way. Minho's thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized was falling. You showed me faith, hope, love. He paused. I love you, Grace. I should have said it sooner, but I love you. And not because you're carrying my child, because of who you are, because you saw something worth saving in me when I'd given up on myself. Grace's heart soared. I love you too. I've loved you for so long. Their kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise of the future they were building together. The months that followed weren't easy. Minjae fought the contract dissolution viciously, trying every legal maneuver his lawyers could find. But Minho's lawyers were better, and more importantly, Grace's pregnancy was progressing beautifully, proving beyond doubt that Minho's condition had been either misdiagnosed or somehow healed. The tabloids had a field day when the news broke. Seoul's most notorious mafia boss was going to be a father. The speculation was endless, but inside the Kang mansion, there was peace. Grace's belly grew round and beautiful. Minho talked to the baby every night, his hand on her stomach, his voice soft with wonder. They turned the unused nursery into something bright and warm and full of hope. And Grace prayed. She prayed for her baby's health, for their family's safety, for Minho's heart to continue opening to the God who'd given them this miracle. On a cold February morning, 7 months after that contract had nearly destroyed everything, Grace went into labor. Minho was beside himself, anxious and terrified, and completely useless in the way all first-time fathers are. Grace found it endearing, even through the pain. 12 hours later, their babies were born. Triplets, 2 boys and a girl. The delivery room had erupted in controlled chaos when the ultrasound revealed not 1 heartbeat, but 3. Minho had nearly fainted. Grace had laughed through her tears because of course God wouldn't just give them 1 miracle, he'd give them 3. Now, as the nurses bustled around, cleaning and weighing the babies, Grace watched Minho's face as he stared at the 3 tiny bundles. His hands were shaking, his eyes were wide with disbelief. 3, he whispered. We have 3 children. The nurse placed the first baby in his arms, the eldest son, born 2 minutes before his siblings. He was tiny and red-faced and screaming his lungs out. He's got your temper, Grace said weakly, exhausted but exhilarated. Minho let out a shocked laugh, tears already streaming down his face. He's real. They're all real. The nurse brought the second son, quieter than his brother, his little face scrunched up like he was already contemplating the mysteries of the universe. Completely unbothered by his dramatic entrance into the world. His eyes were half open, his expression almost bored, like he'd just woken up from a nap he wasn't quite ready to leave. He yawned, actually yawned. Minho let out a surprised laugh. This one's already over it. Then came their daughter, the smallest of the 3, with a head full of dark hair and lungs that rivaled her. Oldest brothers. Minho stood there, frozen, staring at the 3 babies like he couldn't process what he was seeing. All the hardness, all the cold calculation, all the walls he'd spent years building, they crumbled completely. Grace, his voice cracked. How did we get so blessed? God doesn't do things halfway, Grace said, her own tears flowing freely. When he gives miracles, he gives them abundantly. The nurses helped arrange all 3 babies so Grace could see them properly. Minho sat on the edge of the hospital bed, still looking shell-shocked. We need names, Grace said softly, looking at each tiny face. Minho nodded, unable to look away from his children. You've been thinking about this, haven't you? For weeks, Grace admitted with a tired smile. Though I'd been thinking about names for months, I just didn't know I'd need 3 of them. She pointed to their eldest son, still fussing in the nurse's arms. Junwoo, it means talented and divine. Protection. Because he's our firstborn, and he came first, leading his siblings into the world. Our first proof that nothing is impossible with God. Minho nodded, testing the name. Junwoo. Grace looked at their second son, the quiet one. Shiwu. It means divine intervention and excellence, because his existence is exactly that, divine intervention. Junwoo and Shiwu, Minho repeated, his voice thick with emotion. And our daughter? Grace gazed at their tiny girl, the smallest miracle of all. Minseo Ife. Minseo means calm and auspicious, and Ife means love in Yoruba, because she completes us. She's our peace after the storm, and the love that binds this family together. Junwoo, Shiwu, and Minseo. Ife, Minho said, looking at each baby in turn. Then he looked at Grace, and the smile that broke across his face was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. Our family. The door opened suddenly, and Grace's heart clenched as Min-jae walked in. But, before she could protest, Minho stood, instinctively placing himself between his brother and his family. You're not welcome here, Minho said coldly, but Min-jae wasn't looking at Minho. He was staring at the three babies, his face pale with shock. Triplets, he breathed. You had triplets. Minho's jaw tightened, his protective stance unwavering. Min-jae took a step closer, and for the first time since Grace had known him, there was no smirk, no mockery, no cruelty, just raw, overwhelming defeat. They all look like you, Min-jae said quietly, his voice hollow. Like father did, like our family. He swallowed hard. 3 perfect heirs, 3 miracles. Minho's grip on the hospital bed railing tightened. I'm leaving, Min-jae continued, his eyes still on the babies. Moving to the States. I've already signed over my shares in the company. His voice cracked slightly. I spent years believing you were broken, years plotting to take what I thought would eventually be mine. He finally looked at Minho, and Grace saw something she never expected to see in Min-jae's eyes, genuine remorse. But you were never broken. I was the broken one. Grace watched her husband's face, saw the conflict there, the anger, the hurt, but also something else, something that looked like pity. I'm sorry, Min-jae said, his voice barely above a whisper. For everything, for how I treated Grace, for the contract, for believing the worst about you when I should have believed in you. His eyes met Grace's briefly. You deserved better than what I put you through. Both of you did. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to make up for the terror he'd put her through, the way he'd harassed her, the nightmare of that contract. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was truth. Goodbye, Hyung, Min-jae said softly. Congratulations on your beautiful family. And then he was gone. The room fell silent except for the soft sounds of the babies. Minho stood still for a long moment, processing what had just happened. Forgiveness is a process, Grace said gently, reading the question in his eyes. We don't have to rush it. Minho nodded, relief washing over his face. He came back to her side, looking down at their 3 children with wonder. 3, he said again, shaking his head. The doctor said I couldn't have one, and God gave us 3. He's showing off, Grace said with a tired laugh, making absolutely sure no one ever doubts his power again. Minho carefully picked up little Minseo, cradling her against his chest. Junwoo and Shiwu were sleeping now in their bassinets, exhausted from their dramatic entrance into the world. I don't know how to be a father, Minho admitted quietly, staring at his daughter's tiny face. Especially to 3. What if I mess this up? Then we'll mess it up together, Grace said. And we'll pray for wisdom, and we'll love them with everything we have. That's all we can do. Minho leaned down and kissed Grace's forehead, then looked at their sleeping sons and the daughter in his arms. I love you, he said. I don't say it enough, but I love you more than I ever thought I could love anyone. You took a broken man who'd given up on himself and showed me that God hadn't given up on me. God never gives up on anyone, Grace whispered. We just have to be willing to believe. As Minho sat beside her, their daughter still cradled in his arms, Grace thought about the journey that had brought them here. The pain, the betrayal, the impossible contract, and the even more impossible miracles sleeping peacefully around them. She'd entered Minho's house 6 years ago with nothing but a dream and a prayer. She'd been a maid, invisible and overlooked, believing God had more for her than scrubbing floors. And he did. Not just the education she'd wanted, though Minho had already enrolled her in university for when she was ready. Not just financial security, though she had that now too. The more was this: a family. 3 perfect babies who were living proof that God specializes in the impossible. A husband who transformed from a cold, broken man into a father who looked at his children with tears of joy. A love story that had started in darkness but ended in overwhelming light. "What are you thinking?" Minho asked softly, watching her face. Grace smiled through happy tears. "That God answered my prayers, just not the way I expected." "Better?" he asked. "So much better," she confirmed. "I prayed for 1 miracle. He gave me 4. She looked at Minho. "You, Junwoo, Shiwoo, Minseo, 4 impossible miracles." Minho's eyes glistened with fresh tears. "We're going to need a bigger nursery." Grace laughed, the sound mixing with her tears. "We're going to need a lot of things: patience, coffee, triple the amount of diapers." "And faith," Minho added quietly. "We're going to need faith." "We already have that," Grace said, reaching for his hand. "That's what got us here." As their 3 babies slept peacefully, Junwoo already stirring slightly, Shiwoo completely content, Minseo making soft sounds in her father's arms, Grace sent up one more prayer, not asking for anything this time, just thanking God for taking her impossible situation and turning it into the greatest blessing of her life. For taking a man who thought he was broken and showing him he was whole. For taking a contract meant to destroy and turning it into a testimony of redemption. For giving them not 1 miracle, but 3. Because that's what God does best. He takes broken people, impossible circumstances, and devastated hearts, and he makes something beautiful. He doesn't just restore what was lost, he gives back more than you ever dared ask for. He makes miracles, and sometimes he makes them in 3s. And if you've made it this far in Grace and Minho's story, thank you for going on this journey with me. If this story touched your heart, moved you, or gave you hope that your impossible situation can turn into something beautiful, please hit that like button and subscribe, because I have more cross-cultural, emotional, and romance stories coming that will absolutely wreck you in the best way possible. Drop a comment and tell me what part hit you the hardest. Was it Grace's unwavering faith? Minho's transformation from cold to tender? The moment they discovered it was triplets? Or maybe Minjae's redemption? I want to hear from you. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story about believing in the impossible, someone who feels broken or trapped or hopeless, share this video with them. Let them know that no situation is too difficult for God. Until next time, remember, when God does miracles, he doesn't do them halfway. He gives abundantly, exceeding all we could ask or imagine. Keep believing in your miracles. They might come in 3s. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.